Hello, everyone, and welcome to the DIF, the Disruptive Innovation Festival. My name is Karen, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guests. If you are interested in technology, new technologies like the Internet of Things, and you want to know more if these new technologies will help our transition to a circular economy, stay tuned. Today, we have with us Boudewijn Moss. He's the co-founder and of EcoChain Technologies. We have Bill Clee, which is the CEO and the founder of Assets Mapping. We have Eva Gladek, she's the CEO and founder of Metabolic, and helping us to chair this session today is Adrian Segens. He's like actually sustainable through technology consultant. Remember that this is an interactive session, so we want to hear from you. You can post your questions and comments in the chat box below this video in the DIF website. You can also use our social media using the hashtag ThinkDiff. We will also have a particular hashtag today that you will learn in about a few seconds. So welcome all to the DIF.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thank you for that introduction, and welcome everyone, and welcome to one of the very last sessions of what's been an exceptional DIF for 2016. It really has been a privilege to sit into a number of these sessions over the past few weeks, and I would like to pass on my sincere thanks to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and everyone there for organizing this fantastic event. We've heard a lot about the circular economy over the past few weeks, and we'll continue to hear a lot more about it, and that's why we're here. But one of the most interesting observations that I've seen recently comes from a man called Stuart Haywood-Hyam, who's the technical director of Suez, one of the large waste management companies, known to the British audience here until very recently as CETA. Stuart pointed out in a very recent webinar that I attended that the circularity concept is a combination of activities that are interdependent, but there are only basically 9 fundamental elements to it. And that logistics, reverse logistics, and how we move material about in the circular economy. Design is obviously going to be critical, and there's been many discussions over the past few weeks about eco-design and how we can make design for circularity a reality. The materials themselves, of course, and how we manage those, but just as importantly, I think that the policy and the culture, and those are 2 things where I think we need more discussion, because when the policy and the culture changes, the critical thing is that we're going to be moving into a circular economy that's going to be based on collaboration. That is absolutely essential. And for me, that means that data has to flow through the circular economy in exactly the same way that materials do. So we know that data needs to flow. We need to know that that is the basis for all kind of collaboration between the stakeholders who are represented for all of those 9 fundamental elements. But we are in that situation where, as we all know, IT professionals love to draw a big cloud. It all happens in the cloud and it's all magic, and you really don't need to worry what's happening there. Well, frankly, I am concerned. I think we do need to worry about what's happening in that cloud, because I think whilst we all recognize that technology must be the enabler to share that data for the circular economy, I think the danger is that unless we know what's happening in that cloud and we make the cultural and organizational changes to make that happen, that the danger is that circular economy is not going to be enabled by technology, but it could be blocked. And that's why I wanted to start this kind of conversation we have today. So over the next hour, what I want to do is to ask some fundamental questions, and that is about the data in the circular economy. Who needs to know what and why, I think, is a good basis for us to begin the understanding. Also, I think a good understanding while we talk about new business models that will underpin the circular economy is, again, to know what data technology that they will rely on as well to make those happen. We've also heard a lot about Industry 4, the Internet of Things, big data. They're all phrases that the technology community likes to bandy about quite freely. But again, what links precisely do these have to sustainability, and how can we use them to further our agenda? Most importantly, though, I want to start talking about what are the barriers. The barriers are not only technological. The technology is relatively simple. What is the barrier, though? I think are going to be some very real questions about culture and ownership, which are two of those 9 elements that you see in front of you. We all know that, particularly from the excellent work that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation recently did on smart assets, that fundamentally we need always to know the location, condition, and availability of any item within the circular economy. But how do we share that data, and what needs to change? So those are the questions that we'll be addressing in this session. I'm joined, as Karen said, by 3 colleagues of mine who, in my years of working where sustainability meets technology, are some of the most interesting and thoughtful people that I've come across in that space. The first is Bill Clee. Bill Clee is the founder and CEO of Asset Mapping, which is a UK-based Internet of Things company. Bill has been working in that area for a number of years. Firstly, is starting to address issues that came out of the organisation of the London Olympics in 2012, and how you then make devices and things connected. So Bill will be telling us some more about that during the course of this next hour. Eva Gladek is the founder and CEO of Metabolic. Metabolic is based in Amsterdam. It's a company that offers consultancy services and also is developing a really impressive range of technological advancements under its own IP and its own developments, all again related to how we make the world more connected and sustainable. And finally, we're also joined by Boudewijn Moss. Boudewijn Moss is the co-founder and chief commercial officer of EcoChain. And EcoChain has a remarkable technological platform, which again is about giving people visibility of the impact that products have throughout their life cycle and beyond. So I'm going to cut the slides before any more, and I shall go back to the sharing my screen. And what I'd like to do is to firstly turn to you, Bill. Bill, we're, as I said earlier, we've been talking a lot about the Internet of Things and big data and a lot of the other technologies that are being lauded as part of the solution here. But I think it's time as well that we started to look at some definitions of what things are. So, Bill, can you tell us a bit more about what you're seeing as the Internet of Things? Because people talk a lot about connected fridges and everything else that we're supposed to be looking for. But I think your experience has been slightly beyond that and a bit more practical recently.
Sure, and thanks again for inviting me. I think as you mentioned, IoT is an enabler. It's that simple. And really what IoT is about, things, it's about data, it's about process, and it's about people. So we know what the things are. Smart fridges is one that you mentioned. But if you think about all the devices currently being used in buildings, in cities, everything from air conditioning systems to security cameras to generators, these are what we're talking about as things. Now, all of them have very useful data, and that's not just the real-time data coming from them, such as its temperature, its revolutions per second. It's historic data, it's legacy information, such as when it was installed, when it was last serviced, its ID, its type, and all of this information is about needs to be wrapped around the conversation of IoT. And the process, if I just go a little bit into the process, it's when something happens to that device, when the data changes, the temperature goes too high, it stops working, certain thresholds are met. It's making sure that the people have the correct information. So it's people have the right information at the right time to enable them to do something different. So it's about how you get all of these different devices to do something useful. So IoT is just a term. And I think there's a lot of confusion with IoT about really what it means as 50 billion devices in the next 10 years. I think a lot of them already exist, and they're in silos, and it's about how we connect them to the internet or to the networks. So, and obviously there's a lot of security and there's a lot of other issues around doing that and the type of device. But for what we're doing within, I mean, we focus very much on buildings and smart cities, is taking the information from buildings that gives us the insights on how they're being used, how much energy is being consumed, whether the device currently, let's say, an air conditioning unit, can be replaced earlier to give you more energy efficient functionality within the building. And this is all about using the data to save money. So there's no downside if IoT is implemented, properly. So how we're seeing IoT used is connecting into buildings. It triggers an event, and it's around the workforce management where we're seeing some of the big immediate savings. So
what we're seeing here, Bill, is very much the Internet of Things already making a very big contribution in terms of how things are used in their use phase. So through using the Internet of Things, people really are using the technology at the moment in order to make sure that systems are efficient and that things are maintained only to the extent that they have to be. I know previously under a lot of regimes, things are serviced whether they need to be serviced or not, which again uses a great deal of energy. And we could also already, through the kind of systems that asset mapping are promoting and developing and using in smart cities, seeing how those assets are being used currently, how they're using power, whether that amount of power can be used. So the Absolutely. Internet of Things is very much a reality.
Absolutely, and in many ways it's been around for many years. And the difference is it's a lot easier to connect to different devices, different systems, and centralize that information. So it used to be called telemetry. Mm-hmm. It was about understanding things that were not in your, within a mile of you, and find out what's going on. And it's all really about the information, the data. If you have that, you can make better decisions. If you'd only known that one thing 2 days ago, what different decision would have you made? So now we're starting to pull that all together. We're starting to see all sorts of new insights on how to operate a building, how to operate cities, and I think this is what we're going to touch on now. Is rather than just changing a device and sticking it into a landfill, we can start looking at how that is then repurposed. We can start looking at the supply chain, which I know others are going to talk about. But the big cost is around the operation of buildings and cities. And that data being in the right people's hands, so they can do actionable intelligence, not just dashboards. You don't want to just see how much energy or how much carbon or how much
quite right.
Your buildings are costing. You want to be able to make decisions immediately.
So Adrian, I know that you've done a lot of work recently on smart cities as well. So again, you'd have seen this. Sorry, I muted myself there accidentally. You'd have seen this kind of technology in use and the way that we can have real-time visibility of what's happening at the use phase. But how do you see things connecting with that kind of information in what's happened prior to use phase? How do you see this potentially linking into what manufacturers are doing and, of course, what recyclers and repurposers are doing as well?
Well, sorry,
that was later.
Okay. Thanks. It's great to be on with all of you here. And I think I can contribute some insights from our recent work over the last few years in terms of how this has been practically applied at different phases in the life cycle. We've worked on a lot of projects with building developers, and we've also done a lot of built environment projects ourselves. Most recently, we've been one of the leads in Schoonschip, which is actually a 47 household housing development that's taking place in Amsterdam North. And through these projects, we've been trying to implement and scope out where there are opportunities for bringing in IoT technologies to help realize circular ambitions and reduce environmental impacts and improve cost profiles. In the case of buildings, one of the things that you can consider is that they typically go through various refurbishment and repair cycles. So typically you build a building, you have different different elements in there that are due for replacement or repair. Maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years later. And if you actually are able to track the performance of those assets and see how they're used, whether they're performing as listed, which is often not the case with products, you can get much better insight on whether to take, let's say, a heat pump out and exchange it for a new one, or a washing machine, or whatever other device that you have in a household. And this is actually something that could benefit from a lot of real-time optimization, because you don't actually know what's out there on the market when you make a decision to put something into a building. There's this sense in a lot of the sort of design world that designing for maximum longevity is the holy grail, but actually that's not the case if you look at the principles of green engineering, that actually targeted longevity is the best thing to hit for, especially when you're talking about an energy using product like a washing machine or an HVAC unit. But with assets themselves, and actually planning in assets into buildings, you face a lot of other issues. One of our clients is a very large company that has over 400 buildings in their portfolio, and they recently had one of these buildings demolished, and they got around 100,000 euros of residual value from the demolition company as a result of that demolition. But they had two independent auditors perform a study to see what the actual value of the residuals would have been, and it turned out that both of them corroborated it was around 400,000 euros of value that they could have acquired, so 4 times the amount that they actually got. And if they had installed, let's say, asset tracking from the very start of the project, so being able to understand what materials are where, how they can be extracted, having a sort of material passport for the building, this could have completely changed the financial profile of that project. And this is the case for so many projects that are out there, but it requires a holistic approach to this problem. You need to, in the design phase, select materials that are easy to remove. You need to understand what the choices are on the market. You need to be able to see over the lifespan how they've been treated, what conditions they've been exposed to, so that you can verify that these steel beams should still be structurally as solid as they were in the past. So there's a lot of information that has to be tracked throughout that life cycle. Moreover, it requires different types of contracts. So when you're procuring a building or infrastructure project, you need to have agreements down the line that allow for that value to be recovered at the right moment, and that value goes actually to the parties that have made those investments. So this is quite...
There's two very important concepts that you've raised there, Ava. Firstly, of course, we hit ourselves immediately in the face with that question of data. It's a question of, you look at an asset, you look at a product, how much value is there? I'm a stakeholder in that if I own and use that product. I'm also a stakeholder if I'm the person who's going to recycle that. So at the moment, are you seeing any means by which that kind of information is routinely being exchanged?
Well, there are some companies that are doing this, for example, Bill's company, that are starting to collect information on assets. But I think one of the challenges has been, I think in the whole IoT field, there's been this hype around collecting data on everything, but there's been very few consistent channels of monetizing and valorizing that data. And I think that that's led to one of these sort of crashes in some of the hype around IoT, because you need all of these different systemic mechanisms in place and these collaborative agreements to start to be able to make use of that data. We've been working for the last couple of years with a coalition in the Netherlands that has been setting up the first fair smart meter. And they have been trying to now put into place these sort of tracking and tracing technologies for what's in the meter, but also over the life cycle of the meter's performance. And they're running into a lot of different practical issues in making this possible. But in theory, you can imagine what the value of that would be, that you get a very complex product, it gets scanned at the end of its life, and you immediately have a breakdown of all the components in there, which ones can still have a further life cycle of use, etc.
You've used the word life cycle there a few times, as well as holistic and data, which I think are all words that we're going to come back to many times. Boudewijn, if I could turn to you at this point. Ava was talking about life cycle and lifecycle analysis. What EcoChain, of course, does as an organization is give companies the means by which they can look at the life cycle of their products very simply and very easily. It gives a life cycle analysis. But to what end? If you've got a life cycle analysis, how does that then furnish the circular economy? What are the choices that you can make based on that?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me today. Basically, what you're asking, if I understand your question correctly, is how does life cycle assessments tap in on the concept of circular economy? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And what information is generated at every stage in the life cycle? We've heard from Bill very much about the use phase, and from Ava about what can begin to happen if you then see the information of that post-use phase and share that data. But of course, there are implications throughout the life cycle if you see it holistically.
Yeah, well, what I really like about the approach of life cycle assessment, and especially in relation to circular economy, is that it provides you this holistic view over the entire life cycle of a product, which enables companies to focus very much on those things which are most, let's say it in a different way, which provides insight in where the optimization potential in relation to circular economy principles is the highest. So, as an example, if you look, for instance, at a car manufacturer, before, let's say in the past, the way they would approach circular economy or life cycle assessments is using life cycle assessment and then see that 80 to 85% of the environmental impact resides in the user face of this product. So instead of putting a 2-liter engine in a car, they would the OEMs would have the control into making the engine a 1.6, resulting in a huge reduction of this user face impact. Well, if you look nowadays, due to the life cycle approach, we saw that the optimization potential was the biggest in the user face of the car. So changing the fuel use engine, so the normal engine, car engine, and change it into an electrified engine, results in a huge reduction of the energy usage in the user face. So by using the life cycle approach, it identified the highest optimization potential, which was in the user face at that time. So looking at the entire life cycle of a project and relating that to circular economy, it's basically what you do is you continuously assess the entire mass balance, which could be both energy or which is also, of course, can be quantified as mass, but also the resources you actually use in a car, and look for the highest optimization potential. So ultimately, in the perfect circular world where you only use secondary resources and renewable energy, and you plan it to such an extent, like Eva said, where you optimize basically your entire asset management to its full extent, you will have a life cycle impact which is zero on all indicators. So in the perfect circular world, which is still theoretical, of course, but the LCA of your product would be zero over its entire life cycle. So what we try to accomplish with EcoChain is to use LCA in relation to circular economy, and through LCA, look for the highest potential impact reduction, whether it's on energy or resources.
So we have a situation here, hearing from the three of you, that we have that holistic view of the life cycle of a product. We know the information, and many companies are gathering that kind of life cycle analysis information. They're sharing it through mechanisms like EPDs, the Environmental Product Declaration System. And we're seeing that slowly become more widely adopted as a means by which you share information about the impact of a product. But again, what seems to be missing is that while we're gathering this information, while there are systems and technologies that need to use this, as well as systems and platforms and technologies that, for example, are focusing on reverse logistics, which we haven't touched on because there's no one here from the logistics industry or the waste industry here. But nonetheless, this is all information that people are gathering, that people are using in the use phase and beginning to in other phases as well, and in the design phase in particular. Where that information needs to be shared, and it comes back the other way as well. So the designers that you're talking about there, Boudewijn, in their choices in designs, would also find that use phase information hugely valuable because there's no other way that they get feedback as to whether the products are being over-designed or any other kind of aspect that they'd like to take there, components that are failing soon and so on. So this is all this information that people are needing, but it's locked up. This is a concept I know that in the Internet of Things community, people talk about data silos, where the fact is that there's information there and it's locked away. It's locked away in applications, it's locked away in people's heads. Most commonly, it's locked away in an Excel spreadsheet on someone's desktop. Important information that other people, not only in the wider supply chain, but even within the organization, don't have access to. And yeah. CIOs are continually talking about data silos. But Bill, I think you could probably enlighten us here about what's some of the thinking at the moment about how you break down data silos, how you share information more freely, and how do you think that this needs to then come into play to serve the needs of the circular economy?
Well, I think most importantly, it comes down to people's attitude. First of all, I think, as it was mentioned, people are collecting data and holding on to it, thinking there's a value there, and not sharing it. So I think as people are starting to understand that, I mean, another term that's being used quite a lot is digitization. Taking all of the information we have and making it available in a digital form rather than just paper drawings, Excel files. It's available, it's secure, and it can be combined with other data sets. So there's a lot of work being done with open standards, open specifications of how to share data. We've been working on one in the UK called HyperCat, and this is very much for technology companies, and also the end user to add sensors, but rather than developing their own API, there's one that's already been predefined, and we're seeing companies use that, and the integration becomes seamless, becomes immediate, and one of the big issues I think around connected homes is everybody has their own API. I think somebody once said it's a bit like toothbrushes. Everybody wants one, but doesn't want to share somebody else's. So we have that issue with APIs, and the connected homes is a long way away because of that problem. Now with buildings, with industrial IoT, there's not as many. There are protocols, and we can connect that together. And so that's the work we've been doing with HyperCat. But I don't think it really matters what API you choose, as long as it's an open one. As long as you're prepared to take other people's data, but there's still processes needed to be put in place by who has access to that information. Open isn't non-secure, it's just the availability to share.
Well, this is a question to all of you, really. I suppose part of what do we see as the barriers to people sharing information? Because I think there are clearly companies who are nervous about sharing information, as we all should be, cautious about sharing information because we're not sure how it's going to be used. So, for example, in the same way that I could give you all my bank details now, I'm not going to, because not that I don't trust you, it's just that I'm not sure how that information could be used if it were out in the wider world. The same, I suppose, goes for many companies when they're sharing information. Firstly, you're right, Bill. I think you've touched on the implication that this information has a value, and I'm not sure that they're not exploiting that value correctly, or what is there. Ava said about the value, the perceived value, and the actual value of the post post-use waste from a construction project and what the difference was there. So there's also, I think, if we think about some of the information that needs to be shared from a design perspective. For example, if I have an air conditioning unit and I want to share information about it, then the kind of things that people in the post-use phase are going to be interested in is its complete bill of materials, essentially. And I, as a manufacturer, might be nervous about putting that out, at least in a specific sense rather than generally a meta sense. So that makes decisions for people elsewhere from the recycling community, the reuse community, difficult to make because that information is there. So I suppose my question is really, how can we motivate people to share information more? Ava, I know that at Metabolic you've been doing some thinking about this.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of thinking about that particular topic. And I think one of the interesting things with this whole issue of data sharing is it's like the example of the telephone as a technology. If there's only one person who has a telephone, it's pretty useless. It's not going to deliver much value. But the more people that start having phones, the more valuable that technology becomes de facto. Same with the internet and the widespread adoption of the internet. It's a critical mass factor. So all these people who are holding onto their data, trying to capitalize on that value, it's impossible to do that unless more people start opening it up. And you can actually reach across these silos and get, connect what the designers of a product know with what the waste companies know and what the logistics companies know, et cetera. So I think it's about tapping into those types of incentives and allowing people to safely start sharing data so that they can all realize shared value from that data. And I worked on a few projects when I was back in the United States, actually on creating a supply chain transparency in the chemical sector. And that involved, having companies put information on their formulations into the public sphere. And there were some interesting techniques that we used there to make that happen by creating confidentiality screens. So for example, if I wanted to formulate a product as a chemicals producer, I could get insight on whether all the ingredients I wanted to put in there achieved certain scores in terms of environmental performance or, for example, biodegradability without knowing all the information about what was in that product itself. So you can kind of create partial screens for that data. The other thing is, I think, finding ways to really monetize and create sort of a pull for people to share the data so that when they share it, they actually start getting part of that shared value. So creating ways to have there be kickbacks for every time you put some data out there, you actually, every byte of data that you have, it returns some value to you. And also more with collaboration across entire supply chains. If I'm a company that produces a product like a cell phone, if I invest a lot of extra effort and time into making that product recyclable and making sure that all the components in there are tagged and traced, I'm not necessarily going to be the one who gets that value at the end of the product's life cycle. So I would need to work with the entire supply chain down through to the waste management side to make sure that I can actually get that value back by creating some sort of agreement.
Boudewijn, I know that you've been thinking a great deal about the lifecycle analysis and how we drag information from deep in the supply chain on that as well. Again,
yes.
Do you see this as a motivator?
Well, first of all, I can really relate to what Eva is saying. We have we basically see one major problem, one major overall problem in sustainability, and that's the way data is processed, and also the questions that we ask to our stakeholders. So if you imagine if you have a multinational, and you want to know the life cycle impact of a certain product, you need to gather such a huge amount of information, especially from your value chain partners. And the constraints that we see in relation to sustainability is that companies are often asking the wrong question to their suppliers. So if you are making light bulbs and you're sourcing steel or you're sourcing glass, and you're basically asking your supplier, can I get your bill of material? Can I have all your process information? Can I have the amount of energy that is used in your processes? You can with those kinds of information and those kind of data, you can make prime cost calculations. And what companies are very afraid of is oversharing data in the value chain. And that's also the research that we have been doing in the past 3 to 4 years was basically focused on what kind of, or let's say, what is the relationship between ultimately the salesman on one hand and on the other hand, the procurement officer, and what are the questions that they're asking and what are their demands of creating this supply chain transparency. And what we found is that basically 95% of the companies that we talk to, they're asking the wrong questions to their suppliers. Basically, the questions of wanting access to primary data that these suppliers by default cannot share because of the risk of oversharing certain data sets. And what I see also with EcoChain is that, and that's what I can really relate to of the work that Eva has been doing, that somehow you want to protect that primary data, that primary and sensitive data of these suppliers or these stakeholders in a greater sense, and convert this primary secret data into data sets that they are actually able to share. And you mentioned before the environmental product declarations, EPDs. EPD is a great form in which it's a great instrument that can be used in supply chains to communicate. And that's also one of the focus areas within EcoChain, and one of the ways that we enable companies to share information in this uniform format in the form of an EPD to enable for supply chain transparency on a large scale.
Can I?
Yes, of course, Ava, please.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just wanted to add one other thing, which I think is quite a barrier in terms of this data sharing, and that also has to do with, in the future, potentially data tampering. You have you can put sensors throughout a supply chain and collect this information, but you don't have a full sort of guarantee that that data hasn't been tampered with. And right now we're seeing this in particular with trying to make sure that critical materials in a supply chain, especially when we're talking about the 3 T's and a G, so tungsten, tantalum, gold, which often come from conflict regions, so conflict minerals, that they're actually certified when they end up in electronics products. And historically, there's been a lot of manipulation of that. I was recently on a panel exactly on this topic on circular economy and IoT in Poland at their economic forum, and there was a really interesting company called ICTK, which has been developing a data DNA, like a chip DNA, to make sure that data coming from chips can't be tampered with because it actually is embedded in the hardware itself. So there's really interesting things that are also coming up as solutions on that tampering side. But
absolutely,
that's just another example.
Certainly speaking from my experience in supply chains in the past, and looking at global supply chains, people are worried about the veracity, about the accuracy of the information that's spread on technology platforms throughout the supply chain, particularly as it's so globally spread. And what I've actually experienced is that there's a really important network effect that starts to kick in here as well. And we see this all the time in social media. We live currently with the way that we work with our supply chains, in that it's a compliance culture. As Boudewijn said, maybe we're not asking the right questions of our suppliers, because what we're asking of our suppliers currently through most platforms and most systems is, we will come and audit your systems to make sure that everything is okay. And here is a 500 question questionnaire that we will use to assess as to whether you're meeting our CSR standards, regardless of how often they have to tell the same information to various other people that they're doing international business with, or indeed just how relevant and material those questions are to the operation. So again, there's a great deal of emphasis here on people sharing information, but in a compliance kind of way. And what I think one of the things that will get over that compliance barrier is by, again, coming back to that culture change, how we motivate people to share information. And what I've seen work most powerfully is the opportunity for suppliers, particularly in the developing world. And we have an excellent question that's come in here from one of from the audience, which I thank you. Which it says that I'll quote here directly. I understand the importance of new technologies and IoT, and do think they can help us make the transition to a more efficient economy. And he likes the examples that we're giving. But his question, I think, is a very real one. And that is, however, the technological development is not the same in every part of the world. And more developed countries might have an advantage over less developed countries. I would like to know what you think about this problem and how we can possibly solve it. I'll pass that over to everyone else. But again, in my experience, it's about moving beyond, particularly when we see this in the apparel industry, it's about moving beyond that compliance culture. Many years of auditing and many years of sustainability reports have not prevented tragedies like Rana Plaza happening in the developing world. But the reason for that is largely for twofold. It's because given current systems, no one in the industry can see anything beyond tier 1 of their supply chain. And the second thing, I think, is that it's a compliance culture. So if I'm a clothing manufacturer in Bangladesh and I'm really putting in some effort to make sure that my labor conditions are good and that my sustainability situation is good, and that I understand about not dyeing processes that are going to pollute the water stream and so on, and everything else that Greenpeace have highlighted is happening in China and other places. If I'm a supplier who is doing that, doing it correctly, then essentially I've no visibility of that. All I've got is visibility of the fact that I comply, whereas I do much more than comply. And I think when we put systems like the IoT and data sharing in place, then there's the opportunity for people who are doing more than simply complying to stand out above that. So I think that's going to be a big motivator.
Adrian.
Again, I've also seen from systems that there's a network effect that comes in to really check the veracity of data. If we have networks where more people are participating, then we could see through the relationships, there are more points at which inaccurate information is picked up. So for example, all the people here know me on LinkedIn and they know that this is my face. If I were to change my LinkedIn profile with a picture of George Clooney, there are at least 3 people here, plus all of you out there, who are going to find that strange. And that wouldn't happen outside of the network. Sorry, Boudewijn, I was cutting you off there.
No. Sorry, I didn't want to intervene. But quickly, I think the question of Mile is very, very interesting. And what he basically says is his assumption is that companies or let's say countries where technological development is not the same as we might have here in the West, there might be advantage that we have over here, while actually we see the contrary. Because what we basically measure is environmental impact, basically on our platform, if I talk about the activities of EcoChain. And what we see is that ultimately environmental impact is nothing else than losing resources which didn't pass your cash registry. So basically what we see is we measure inefficiency of energy and resource flows. So what we see a lot is the work we do here in the West. If we look at it from an optimization effort or potential, then we see that the optimization potential here over the year has been leaned out to a great extent. So looking at the business case behind sustainability, looking at the business case behind circular economy, and the ability to tap in on this business case, is to look at it from a resource and energy optimization point of view. And what we see then is that in the, let's say, less developed countries or less technological developed countries, the optimization potential on resource and energy is so immensely great that enabling those companies to tap in on this business case is actually much easier to achieve at this point in time than optimizing the last few percent that we can achieve here in the West. So I really like the approach of connecting sustainability and connecting circular economy to economics, because then we see that the true potential lies in the less developed countries.
That's a really interesting point. Thank you, Boudewijn. While we're again going back to the questions here, there's another one here about data information and who will. It's again a very common question in the Internet of Things community now that we're starting to address these things. But it's one of the most important things, I think, and it comes down to culture and compliance, and it comes back to motivation. The second question we have here is about data information, and it's a great question. Who will have access and control overall to the information? Is it the companies, or will it stay the ownership of collaborative platforms? Bill, would you like to speak to that?
Sure. And actually, this quite neatly touches on another point recently raised. Now, so if I talk around buildings and cities, at the moment, the data about a building, the built environment, is ordinarily owned by the service providers. They're the people doing the work, they're collecting data. So the biggest problem is the owners don't have their own data. So until they start taking ownership and start controlling what they own, I mean, this is through CIOs and then sharing the information with new service providers so they can see exactly what they own, when it was last used, when it was last serviced, etc. But I think the whole idea needs to be around data custodians. We can derive information about equipment, but that still belongs to the building owner. But the insights we find can then be used for other clients or other customers. So I think, like the internet, the data is going to be all over the place. It's going to be in lots of different systems, real-time BMS systems. It's going to be within IoT devices. So it's about merging all this together, and it's the derived data, the insights, which really has the value. So I don't think there is going to be a overarching owner, and I think this is perhaps where some of the larger corporates are seeing this play for becoming the super middleware. Almost similar to the way we saw AOL try to take ownership of the internet by creating their own modems, their own dial-ups. And I think this is really about lots of people with almost domain expertise, niche products, working together collaboratively within this huge, data, data store, whatever you would like to call it. So I don't think it's going to ever be ownership of a few companies.
Can I? Well, Adrian, if you want to say something in between, that's great too. Okay. So one of the things that I think this is a really great question, and obviously there's a lot of issues wrapped up in it. Access and control of this data can be really powerful, and in the whole smart cities world, there's a lot of debate about really big companies like Cisco or IBM owning huge amounts of this information, and I think that there's actually a need for a sort of intervention, for something to happen in order to open up this data and for this sort of global stewardship to occur. And that touches on a project that we're working on at Metabolic that I'd love to introduce really briefly. So we do have this long-term ambition to create something called an Internet of Resources. And what the idea behind this is, it builds on a concept that was brought up by Buckminster Fuller in the 1960s. Just as Google has now created this digital Earth through Google Maps and Google Earth, we actually need to start visualizing and making public a lot of the information around resource flows, around environmental parameters, et cetera. And there's a lot of ways to bring that together. We have lots of public data sets that you can put together in order to create this vision of a digital Earth, which would eventually allow us to do real-time optimization of supply chains, resource management, et cetera. And I think it goes back to this idea of putting things, the telephone example I gave earlier, that once you reach a critical mass, the more data you add into this, the more value it starts to acquire. And it's a really tricky thing to solve. We're definitely not tackling this head on. We're not going to go off and build this, but we are hoping over the course of the next year to host some important stakeholder events where we can bring key parties to the table to see what steps need to be taken to start making this kind of public domain resource possible for the broader public. So that's something that we're also very open to talking to other parties about, and we would love it if people would email us to see how they can plug into this future endeavor. And I'm happy to talk more about it, but take too much time.
Can I just add one final point to exactly that? It's the other thing, again, we were talking about earlier about the people side of IoT is, you know, also being enabling people, citizens, to start interacting and adding devices, adding you know, problems, so they become far more collaborative with their own communities, their own cities. And there is this real missing piece at the moment within the existing way we deal with data. And I think IoT is going to bring that out where, you know, I mean, I would call it the curtain twitcher, the person who's monitoring their community can now become interactive. They can start reporting faults and problems, whether that's a device or whether that's a pollution within, you know, within a nearby river. And then that starts to trigger events. People start to do something about it and report back to the systems. So it's also about how you engage people, you know, how you engage the workforce. So looking for basic information. And I think, and where that data ends up living will be, you know, across the internet with people themselves. And I think that's the big shift. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about all this is everybody wins. There is no losers apart from the people who don't want to share information. They are the ones that are going to be disrupted right now.
But that's going to be a big cultural shift. And do we see that as the fundamental barrier? Because to summarize, what I'm hearing from the conversation we've had this afternoon is that number one, the technology exists. It's in different places at the moment. So all the information that we're talking about that we would need to furnish the circular economy is there. It's in ERP systems, it's in lifecycle analysis, it's in supply chain systems, it's in all the information that companies currently have. The issue, of course, that most companies face is that their own employees within an organization can't see that information, and that's why CIOs spend so much time talking about data silos and how you break them down. But there's a motivation there to break down data silos, or it's there because the manager who has all this information locked away in a spreadsheet on his desktop that he's the only one who knows how to access is again sitting on that data, and again there's that cultural thing that needs to be broken. So is that the biggest single barrier? The technology is there. It's about how we motivate people.
I think that is one of the. I would say that is the main barrier. I think the thing that you see, whether we're talking about a single company or the world at large, is that the data needs to interact with itself. You need to have ways of layering data from different locations, timescales, et cetera, to have that start to have meaning. And you can use a biological metaphor, for example. If you look at a human body or an ecosystem, we're basically outfitted with billions of sensors, of tiny sensors. They're chemical, and they continuously monitor the environment. They understand what levels of hormones are in the system, or what levels of detritus are on the forest floor, et cetera, and are able to respond in real time to that information, which creates the sort of optimization that we see in natural systems. And that's the kind of optimization that we lack in our man-made production systems. And we do have these sensors in place, but we don't have them connected. And so we've been discussing all these barriers to connecting them, but that's ultimately, I think that's the main thing. How do we get this data to live, to be connected with itself? And I think the ones that you've highlighted, that we've highlighted in this discussion are key, but ultimately the underlying one is the motivation, the cultural shift, and getting people to implement what we already have at our fingertips to make this actually work.
So to summarize, I know we're getting sort of close to the end of our time here this afternoon, and we could go on talking about this for much longer, I know. But if we could sort of bring this to some kind of a summary, I think the conclusions that we're getting is that, firstly, data needs to be shared. We need to be able to find ways of freeing up data so that they flow along with the materials that we need to be managing as part of the circular economy. So every time there's a piece of material that moves, the data that needs to move with it, and it's how we start to facilitate that. It's just as important as the physical logistics of actually moving things. But the question that seems to be the other questions that are coming up is, is technology going to be the blocker of the circular economy, or is it going to be its savior? It needs to be its savior rather than its blocker. But the question is, because technology, to me, from everything I've heard, is out there. So we know about the issues of data silos. There's a lot of people who are breaking that down because that kind of situation has to change. There are technologies out there that are really very simple and very accessible. So, for example, the computer that I'm talking to you on this now, in an ideal world, what I should be able to do is find somewhere on it something as simple as a QR code that I could scan, and that would take me somewhere to find. A lot of people in the Internet of Things world are talking about the Facebook of things, but I could like to see a Facebook page for this computer. And what it would have is an EPD that would tell me sort of what its environmental impact as a product was. It would also show the service history of everything that's happened to it since I bought it, so that we can see what its components are. And then, of course, someone should be able to see, and I'd be perfectly happy as its owner for them to see, its materials and what can be recycled after that, so that someone can either make me an offer for it or suggest ways in which I could extend its use cycle. So it's about how we share that data, the motivation that brings it down, because the technology seems to exist. So what is missing? That's the thing. I think what we seem to be coming towards is this central depository, in whatever form that takes, where we could look at all of that pool, all of that information that results to one product or one asset. It's what form do we think that needs to take? I mean, Ava, you talked about the concepts that you've had, but would this need to be a not-for-profit organization so that people can trust it? And there are so many precedents out there about how that works, or does it need to be open source?
Well, the way that we're thinking about it is really that you do need something that holds this information in the public's trust. So it does need to be some sort of not-for-profit basis. But in order to incentivize companies that have all these different tools and resources, ideally there are proprietary services that could be built on top of that, or screens that would allow for certain companies to keep parts of their data protected in order for them to maintain their business advantage in their sector. So there's a lot of thinking that actually needs to go into this. This is one of the most complex issues. But if we're able to create this sort of digital earth data repository, then you need to have at least a large part of that be public data that most people can benefit from immediately, and then parts maybe that are layered that are proprietary. That's our current thinking.
Just to emphasize how important a question that is in the minds of everyone that's listening. We have a question here: how can you make people trust? We might be concerned about what will happen to the information that we're sharing, and who will benefit from the data. So again, I think that's looking at that fundamental cultural issue here of how we can make people trust and share this information. So Ava, do you want to share some information just about this concept, about how you're going to be developing further? You said that previously people should email Metabolic.
Yes, everyone is welcome to email info@metabolic.nl or my personal email address, eva@metabolic.nl. And we're hoping to host a conference next year that will bring together key stakeholders who want to have discussions on these topics, and ideally everyone who's in attendance here will also be part of that event. And we're going to be publishing more information about this whole effort in the coming months. So that's we will be setting up some kind of social business, a foundation that will need to be the carrier of the first iteration of this project. And right now we have been building a number of our own tools, like dashboards for calculating circular economy performance for cities with clients, et cetera. So these are forming small building blocks that we have, but we want to open up everything that we have and put it into this type of foundation in the near future. And we're definitely looking for collaborators and co-thinkers in this whole process.
Well, I think it's collaborators and co-thinkers is, again, one of the key learnings that have come from this whole session over the past hour. If we're going to make the circular economy work, it is about something that's much more collaborative and not in any kind of ideal or hippie sense. It's a question of how we get a collaborative economy, which means that we can all benefit from sharing this data. But share this data we must, otherwise it's going to be a long and difficult road to making the circular economy a reality. So I think it's great what we've done here is that we've started in our own small way that kind of discussion about what needs to be shared in terms of information, how we gather it and how we get it out there. There's a willingness here for it to happen that I think we just need to take forward. And anyone who's out there listening, please do join us. We'll keep you informed about these ideas as they develop, about the latest in our thinking in terms of how we begin to share data. But with that, the time is against us. It's now 4 o'clock in GMT and 5 o'clock on Central Europe, where I know Ava and Boudewijn are probably waiting to go home to start the weekend. So I'm going to say thanks again to all three of you. It's been wonderful as always talking to you, and I hope that the people out there listening as well also found the everything that we've discussed useful. And finally, before I wish everyone a good weekend, again, it's thanks to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for arranging what has been an absolutely brilliant diff. So thank you all. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, actually, thank you all of you for this. Is actually a very interesting session here at the DIF. Like, we had lots of sessions regarding circular economy, but it's mostly from the business perspective, like how can business benefit from this. But we had few sessions about technology and circular economy. So I think you had a great session to our lineup this year. For those in the audience who are interested in technology, I would like to recommend you actually on circular economy as well. Like you heard Eva today, she has a video, another open mic session. It was an open mic from last week, on last Friday, 4 p.m. And it's a video titled Embrace Complexity, Effective Resource Use in Circular Economy. It's already available in Catch Up, so you can see that one as well. Today we had another session about technology, and a lot of these issues actually rise. The issue of collaboration and data, who is going to control it, the issue of trust as well. And it was at 12, we had a session with Bob Bishop, who is the president and founder of International Center of Earth Simulation, and Professor Peter Herrett and Stefan Passmore from EcoSequest Trust. And they were actually talking about systems modeling and this software that they are developing to connect everything, like locally, scale everything and connect human beings and economy and ecology all together in this system. So if you're really interested in technology, it's worth watching. And another one that I want to recommend, we had this week on Wednesday, we had the famous Douglas Rushkoff talking about the rise of technology, and he's explaining actually why technologies are not delivering what they seem to promise at the beginning. So with that, I leave you all today. Thank you very much for joining this session. And remember, if you want to watch any of the more than 300 sessions that we had this year at the DIF, you can open my DIF account. It's completely free. It will take you 2 minutes to register, and you will be able to watch everything until the end of December. Thank you very much again to all of you.
Thank you
for participating. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.